For 45 years, I have spent most of my evenings alone in a little room the size of a closet, throwing light at a wall so the people of my town could sit together in the dark and feel something. That is the whole of what a movie is. When you take it apart, light and shadow on a wall, and a room full of strangers and neighbors breathing at the same time, laughing at the same second, going quiet at the same second, so that for 2 hours nobody in that room is alone with whatever they carried in. I run the projector. I am the man you never see, up in the booth behind the little window, feeding the light. I have watched this town fall in love and grieve and grow up in the blue glow of my screen for 45 years, and I would have told you I knew every soul who ever sat in those seats. The man who tried to take all of it from me sat in the third row from the back, on the aisle, the same seat, every Friday night for 30 years. He was the one man in that dark room I never thought to keep an eye on. I had the projector pointed the wrong way the whole time. I was throwing light at the screen when I should have been shining it on the third row from the back. My name is Owen Crandall. I am 70 years old, and I own the Rialto, a single-screen movie theater on the main street of Halford, Kansas, that my father bought in 1946, and that I have run since he died. I want to tell this slow, the way a good picture earns its ending, because the thing that nearly went dark forever was not the multiplex out by the highway. And it was not the streaming everybody does at home now. It was the man my family had trusted with its money for 3 generations, and the most honest make-believe I ever sold could not compete with the lie he was telling me with a handshake. Let me build the thing up first, so you understand what was nearly lost. My father came home from the war and bought a worn-out picture house on Halford's main street with money he did not really have, because he believed a town needed a place to dream together. He named it the Rialto, after a grand theater he had seen once in a city. And he ran it through the good years when Main Street was full, and Friday night meant the whole town in their good clothes under the marquee. I grew up in that booth. I learned to thread a projector before I learned to drive. I took it over when he passed, and I ran it through the hard years. The years the mall came, and then the multiplex, and then the screens everybody carries in their pockets. The years every other single-screen house in this part of Kansas went dark, one beautiful old marquee at a time, until the Rialto was the last one standing for 60 miles. I kept it alive on spit and stubbornness and not much else. I did my own repairs. I ran the projector and sold the tickets and made the popcorn some nights, all by myself. I never got rich. A one-screen theater in a small town does not make a man rich. It makes him necessary, which is different and, I used to think, better. Because the Rialto was past the movies, more than a building. It was the place the high school had its prom when the gym flooded. It was where the town gathered the night of the big tornado warning, because the Rialto has the thick old walls. It was $1 a seat on Christmas Eve, so no kid in Halford ever had a Christmas without a movie. When old Walt Pearson was dying, I ran his favorite Western for him on a Tuesday afternoon. Just him and me and John Wayne, because he could not get to the matinee anymore. You cannot put that on a balance sheet. It is not a business. It is a hearth that happens to charge admission. And it was the last warm, lit thing on a main street that had been going dark, storefront by storefront, for 30 years. I could tell you 100 Fridays. Half the married couples in Halford had their first date in those seats, and a good number of them their first kiss in the back row, and they brought their kids, and now those kids bring theirs. 3 generations in the same seats in the same dark. I have watched a whole town laugh so hard at the same second that the floor shook. And I have watched a whole town go silent together at a sad ending and file out wiping their eyes and not minding that the neighbors saw. There is a thing that happens to people in the dark together that does not happen any other way. Not in church and not at a ball game, and surely not alone on a couch with a screen the size of a playing card. For 2 hours, nobody is alone. I learned the craft of it from my father in that booth, how to thread the film and time the changeover between reels so the picture never blinks, how to read the room through the little window and know when they were with you and when you were losing them. It is a trade, projection, an old one, mostly gone now. I am one of the last men in Kansas who can still run a carbon arc and splice a broken reel with his hands. I gave my whole life to it, and I never once thought of it as a sacrifice. Because a man who gets to be the keeper of the one room where his whole town comes to feel things together has not sacrificed anything. He has been handed the best seat in the house. Now I have to tell you about Lowell Tasker. And to tell it right, I have to tell you about 3 generations of a handshake. The Taskers have been the bankers of Halford as long as the Crandalls have run the Rialto. Lowell's grandfather lent my father the money for the theatre in 1946 on little more than a handshake and a belief that the town needed it. Lowell's father carried the loan through the lean years and never once foreclosed on a soul in this county during the bad times, because that was not how a Halford bank did business. And Lowell and I grew up together, 2 boys whose fathers trusted each other, and when we took over our family things, the bank and the theatre, we carried that trust forward without ever discussing it, the way you carry your own name. Lowell held the Rialto's mortgage. He held my savings. He was my banker and my friend. 3rd row from the back, every Friday, 30 years. I trusted Lowell Tasker with every dollar I had and every dollar the Rialto owed. Completely, without a second thought. The way you trust the projector to catch the light. It was not just business between us, is the thing. Lowell came every Friday, 3rd row from the back, on the aisle, and after the last show we would sit in the empty house and talk while I rewound the reels. 2 men whose fathers had trusted each other, and there was no easier company in my life. When my Eleanor died, 6 years back, it was Lowell who handled everything I was too gutted to handle, who sat with me in this lobby past midnight more than one night that first winter, who quietly carried a payment or 2 when I could not see straight enough to run a matinee. When his own marriage fell apart, it was a back row seat at the Rialto he came to, night after night, to sit in the dark where nobody could see his face. We had buried each other's parents. He was the closest thing I had to a brother after Eleanor was gone. I tell you this, not so you will pity me, but so you will understand the size of the thing he spent. A man does not get robbed by a stranger and call it a tragedy. He calls it a crime and moves on. It is only a tragedy when the hand that takes everything is a hand you would have died holding. That trust was the lens he turned around on me. The trouble came from the same place it comes for every old main street in America now. Money had decided Halford's downtown was worth something again. Not the town, the corner. There was a development outfit out of the city, Drayton Development, that had been buying up failing main streets across the state and turning them into what they call mixed use, which means they tear down the old brick and put up the same building they put up everywhere, with shops below and condominiums above, and a parking structure where the Rialto used to be. I had seen what they left behind, because I had driven through the towns they had finished with. There was a town 2 counties over that used to have a main street as fine as ours, an opera house, a hardware, a soda fountain, all of it brick from the 1890s, and Drayton had been through it like a fire that bills you for the ashes. Now it has a block of tan stucco that looks like every other block of tan stucco in America. Half the condominiums empty, the shops below them a phone store and a vacancy. And an old man told me in the diner there that the town does not gather anywhere anymore, that there is no longer a place where you run into everyone, that a main street is a thing you do not know you need until a company shows you what its absence feels like. That is what they wanted to do to Halford. And the Rialto's block, the heart of old Halford, was exactly the corner Drayton wanted. The whole project hung on getting it, and the Rialto was the holdout, because the Rialto was not for sale. Because you cannot sell a hearth. And the Rialto's block, the heart of old Halford, was exactly the corner Drayton wanted. The whole project hung on getting it. And the Rialto was the holdout, because the Rialto was not for sale, because you cannot sell a hearth. What I did not know, what took me too long to see, was that Lowell Tasker was not just my banker anymore. Lowell had quietly become an investor in Drayton Development. He sat on a piece of that deal. The man who held my mortgage, the man who held my savings, the man who sat third row from the back and ate my popcorn, stood to make a great deal of money if the Rialto came down and Drayton's project went up. My banker and the man who wanted my building were the same man, and he had not told me, because the whole thing only worked if I never found out. And then he made his move, and he made it with the gentlest, most reasonable face in the world. The Rialto's mortgage had a balloon payment in it, a big lump that comes due every so often, the way these old loans do. For 20 years, every time it came due, Lowell's bank had simply rolled it over, renewed it, the way his father and grandfather always had. A formality, a handshake, a signature. Done. It had never once been a question. So when it came due that spring, I went in to renew it the way I had a dozen times. And Lowell, my friend Lowell, sat behind his desk with a sorrowful look and told me that the bank could no longer justify renewing the loan, that the Rialto's numbers did not support it, that, as much as it pained him personally, he had a fiduciary duty to the bank, and the responsible thing, the only thing, was to call the note, the full balloon, due in 90 days, a sum I could no more pay than I could fly to the moon. He said it would break his heart to foreclose on an old friend. He said maybe it was time, that I had given the Rialto a good long run, that nobody could fault me for letting go, that the town was changing and a man had to be realistic. He used that word, realistic, the way they all do. And he had already begun, quietly, the way they always do, to let Halford know that poor Owen could not keep the old place going, that the Rialto was a sweet relic, but a relic, that progress was coming whether the sentimental old man liked it or not. I will not pretend I took it standing. It put me on the floor for a good month, and there is no lonelier place on earth than an empty single-screen theatre at midnight, with the seats folded up and the screen blank and a foreclosure clock running. Because the thing that broke me was not the money. It was Lowell. It was that the man telling me the bank could not help me was the man who had grown up in those seats, whose father would have lent me the money out of his own pocket before he let the Rialto go dark. And I believed him, that the numbers were the numbers, that my friend's hands were tied, that it was nobody's fault, just the cold arithmetic of a changing world. I sat in that empty house night after night and did the math on myself. I was an old man running a kind of theatre the world had stopped wanting, propped up on a loan a bank could no longer justify. And maybe Lowell was right. Maybe it was time. Maybe the kindest thing was to let the last marquee go dark and stop pretending one stubborn old man could hold back the tide. There is a thing we have in this trade called a ghost light, a single, bare bulb you leave burning on an empty stage so the theatre is never completely dark, never completely abandoned. The Rialto has one, on a stand in the middle of the screen. And those nights I would sit in the third row, in Lowell's seat as it happened, with just that one bulb burning, and I would look at the blank screen where I had thrown light for 45 years, and I would feel, for the first time in my life, that I had nothing to project, that the picture was over, and the house lights were coming up, and the story did not have the ending I had spent my whole life selling. I am not ashamed to say I came close. I had the letter from a real estate man in a drawer, an offer to take the building off my hands before the foreclosure, pennies on what it was worth. And there were nights I nearly signed it just to stop the clock, just to not have to be the Crandall who let the Rialto go dark while the whole town watched. A man alone in the dark with a clock running will talk himself into almost any ending. The ghost light is the only thing that kept the room from being black. and some nights it felt like the only thing keeping me from it too. What turned me was Vivian, who has sold tickets and made the popcorn and kept the Rialto's books at the little desk in the lobby for 40 years, and who does not believe in arithmetic that does not add up. She came to me one morning with the loan papers and the bank's notices spread out, and she said, "Owen, I have watched this bank carry this theatre for 40 years, and I have never once seen them call a note that was being paid on time. And you have never missed a payment in your life. Something here does not add up. And you have been so busy being heartbroken that you have not done the thing you do every single night, which is look at how the light is really falling. Go find out who is really standing in the dark." So in the morning, I stopped being a heartbroken old man and went back to being the man in the booth. The man whose whole job is to see what is actually being projected and what is only shadow. And I started turning the light around on the third row from the back. It did not take long once I knew to look. A man cannot sit on a development deal and hide it forever in a town the size of Halford. I found Lowell Tasker's name where it did not belong, in the ownership of an entity that fed into Drayton Development, the very outfit that needed my corner. It was buried, the way these things are, 2 and 3 layers down, a holding company inside a holding company, the kind of paper a man builds when he wants the truth to be technically findable and practically invisible. But I have spent 45 years splicing film, finding the one frame where the cut was made, and a paper trail is just another reel. I followed it from the county recorder to the Secretary of State and back, and there at the bottom, under a name that was not his name, but money that was his money, was Lowell. The man who held my mortgage owned a piece of the company that wanted my building in the ground. I sat with that a long while in the empty theatre, under the ghost light, and felt the last of my heartbreak burn off and turn into something steadier and colder and more useful. Because it meant the numbers had never changed. I had not failed. The Rialto had not failed. My friend had simply decided, somewhere along the way, that a piece of a parking structure was worth more than 30 years of Fridays and 3 generations of a handshake. And he had used the trust itself as the crowbar, and a man who does that has not been careful. He has left fingerprints on the one thing that can end him. My banker was an investor in the company that wanted my building torn down. The man who called my note stood to profit directly from my foreclosure. The numbers had not changed. Lowell had changed. He had not called the Rialto's loan because the bank could no longer justify it. He had called it because he had quietly become the developer, and the developer needed the Rialto gone. And the easiest way to get it gone was to use the trust of 3 generations and the mortgage in his own desk drawer to take it. And the moment I understood that, the whole thing turned over, because a banker who steers a customer into default to benefit a deal he is secretly invested in has not done hard but honest banking. He has done the one thing a bank, a real bank, with regulators and a board and a holding company, cannot survive being known to allow. Lowell had been so sure of my trust, so certain the sentimental old man would never look behind the screen, that he had forgotten he was not the only one watching. He had a board above him. He had bank examiners who answer to the state and the federal government. He had a whole institution that would sooner cut off his hand than be caught letting one of its officers loot a customer for his own side deal. His cleverness was not his armor. It was the reel of film I needed, and he had handed it to me himself. I did 2 things, and I did them quietly. The way you load the next reel before the current one runs out, so the picture never stops. First, I killed his leverage. I took the Rialto's books, the honest ones Vivian had kept for 40 years, the ones that showed I had never missed a payment, to a credit union 2 counties over, and to a fund that lends to historic Main Street theatres, an outfit that exists precisely to keep places like the Rialto from going dark. And they looked at 45 years of a man paying his debts on time and keeping a beloved building alive, and they refinanced the whole balloon, paid Lowell's bank off in full, every cent, on honest terms a theatre could actually carry. It was Vivian's books that did it, in the end. For 40 years, she had written down every dollar in a ledger, in a hand you could read across the lobby, never trusting the bank's statement to be the last word, keeping our own record the way her mother had taught her. And when I laid 40 years of that in front of the Preservation Fund, they did not see a failing relic. They saw a theatre that had never missed a payment through every hard year the business had, run by a man the whole town would walk through fire for. And they could not write the check fast enough. Because keeping the last single-screen house in 60 miles of Kansas alive was the entire reason their fund existed. I signed those papers in a credit union 2 counties over, and I drove home that night past the dark towns Drayton had already finished. And I thought about how close I had come to signing the other paper, the one in my drawer, and how the difference between the two had been one woman who refused to believe arithmetic that did not add up, and kept her own books for 40 years on the chance that one day they would be the only true record left. The note Lowell was going to foreclose on simply ceased to exist. The leverage he had built his whole scheme around evaporated. Because the thing about a called note is that it only has power if you cannot pay it. And I had just paid it. From somewhere he did not control. Second, I gathered the proof of what he was. The documents that showed Lowell Tasker held a stake in Drayton Development while he held my mortgage and called my note. And I did not take it to a newspaper or shout it on the street. I took it where it would actually land. I took it to the chairman of the bank's holding company. And I made sure a copy reached the state banking examiners. Because a man like Lowell does not answer to the town. He answers to the institution. And the institution cannot afford him. But I did not start with the documents. I have shown enough pictures to know that you do not open with the ending. You earn it. So before any of it became official, I asked Lowell to come to the Rialto, after hours. And I asked a few others to be there. Vivian, a couple of the old-timers from the town council. And, because the Rialto is the town's house and not only mine, the door was open the way it is on a show night, and a fair number of Halford wandered in and stayed, the way they do. I met Lowell in the lobby, under the marquee lights, where his grandfather had once shaken my father's hand. And I did not start with the bank or the deal or the law. I started with the handshake. The lobby of the Rialto has not changed much since 1946. The same red carpet, worn pale down the middle, where 70 years of feet have walked to the same doors. The same brass rail at the box office where Vivian sits. The framed photographs on the wall of every premiere and every full house since my father's day. The town in its good clothes under the marquee, decade by decade. The same faces, aging, and then the same faces young again as the children take their parents' places. I had asked Lowell to come at 9, after the last show. And when he came in out of the dark in his good coat, the lobby was not empty the way he expected. Vivian was at the box office. 2 of the old-timers from the council were on the bench by the popcorn, and the door was open, the way it is on a show night. So a couple dozen of Halford had drifted in and were standing quiet under those photographs, their grandparents and parents looking down from the walls. Lowell stopped just inside the door and took it in. And I watched him understand that he had not come to a private conversation between 2 old friends. He had come into the town's house, in front of the town, under 100 years of its own faces. I let him stand in it a moment. Then I started with the handshake. I reminded him, in front of everyone, of 3 generations, of a banker who lent my father the money on faith because the town needed a place to dream, of a banker who carried the loan through the lean years and never foreclosed on a neighbor, of 2 boys who grew up in those seats and were supposed to carry that trust forward like our own names. And I told him, quietly, that he had taken the rarest thing his family ever built, the trust of a whole town that a tasker's word was good, and spent it to take the one building that still held the main street together, for a piece of a parking garage. I watched it land on him, and I will tell you what I saw, because it was not what I expected. Lowell did not deny it. He could not. The room could see I knew. But he did not crumble either. He drew himself up behind the only thing he had left, and he said, in the careful voice of a man who had practiced it on himself for a year, that he had a duty to the bank, that the theatre was failing, that he had made the prudent decision, that progress was coming to Halford with or without him, and he had simply made sure his family would not be left behind by it. He actually believed it, or had made himself believe it, which is worse. He had dressed up the betrayal of a 3-generation trust as fiduciary prudence, and he stood in my lobby and called it duty. And that was when I said, the only hard thing I said to him all night. I told him his grandfather lent my father the money on a handshake when the numbers did not support it either. Because his grandfather understood that a bank in a small town is not a fiduciary to its shareholders, it is a fiduciary to the town. And that his father carried that for 40 years. And that the duty Lowell was hiding behind was the exact duty he had betrayed. I told him he had not been left behind by progress. He had sold the only thing a small-town banker ever really owns, which is the town's belief that his word is good. And he had sold it cheap. And every person in that lobby now knew it. Then I let the cold part land, for the room and for him both. I told him the note was paid, in full, that morning, from a lender he did not control, and that there was nothing left for him or Drayton to foreclose on. And I told him, without raising my voice, that the chairman of his holding company and the state examiners would, by week's end, have a complete picture of a bank officer who called a customer's note while secretly invested in the development that needed that customer gone. I did not have to describe what that meant. Lowell Tasker had spent his whole life in banking. He knew exactly what an examiner does with a self-dealing officer, and he knew it could not be talked away. And I watched the prudent, practiced face finally come apart. Because he understood that he had not outmaneuvered a sentimental old man at all. He had handed that old man the one reel that would end him, and called it duty the whole way. And then he did a thing I have turned over many times since. He looked around the lobby, at the photographs of 3 generations of Halford under the marquee, at the neighbors standing quiet beneath them, at the box office where his grandfather once shook my father's hand, and the fight went all the way out of him. And what was left was not a banker and not a developer, but a tired man who had traded the only inheritance that mattered for money he did not even need that badly. He said one thing, very low, before he left. He said, "My father would have given you the money." And I did not answer him, because there was nothing to add. He had passed his own sentence, in front of the only jury whose verdict he ever cared about, which was the town. And his own father, looking down from the wall. Drayton Development pulled out of Halford within the month. Their whole project depended on a corner they were never going to get, and a banker who was suddenly radioactive. Lowell was quietly forced out of the bank his family had run for 3 generations, allowed to resign before the examiners made it uglier, which was the institution protecting itself, not mercy. The mercy was mine to give or withhold. And here is the part I am actually proud of. I had more than enough to bury Lowell completely. I could have pushed the regulators for everything they could throw at him, and there was plenty. I could have sued him and the bank for what the manufactured default had cost me, and very likely won. I could have done what I have watched 1,000 movie heroes do in that very theatre. Stood up in the last reel and made sure the whole town watched the villain get every last thing coming to him. And I will be honest, sitting alone in that empty house at midnight a month before, I had wanted to. I didn't. I took no money from him. I pushed the regulators no further than was needed to stop the scheme and protect the Rialto, and not 1 inch into the kind of public ruin that would have followed his wife and his children, who had done nothing. Because I have spent 45 years showing this town stories where the bad man burns in the final reel. And the thing about doing that for 45 years is that you come to understand it is make-believe. It is the most satisfying make-believe there is, and people need it, which is why I sell it. But real life is not a picture, and I am not a man in a movie, and I did not need the whole town to watch Lowell Tasker burn. I needed the lights to stay on. Those are two different endings, and the second one is the only one that was ever worth having. The Rialto is still here. The marquee is still lit on Friday nights, and the town still comes. More of them now than before, because a town that nearly loses its last theatre remembers, for a while at least, what it was for. Vivian still sells the tickets. My grandson, who is 12, has learned to thread the projector and stands up in that little room beside me throwing the light and asks me which seat the bad man used to sit in. The way kids want the story to have a clear villain in a clear seat. I tell him it does not work like that. I tell him the dangerous ones do not sit where you are looking. I tell him you keep your eyes on the whole room, not just the screen. And you keep your own books, and you never let any one man, however long you have trusted him, be the only one who knows where your money is. And then I point the light back at the screen, where it belongs, where the make-believe is honest because everybody knows it is make-believe. And I let the town sit together in the dark and feel something, which is the only thing my family ever sold, and the only thing that was ever worth keeping lit. They thought a sentimental old man would never look behind the screen. I have spent my whole life in the one room in town where you can see exactly how the light is really falling. They forgot that the man in the booth sees everything, eventually. It just took me 30 Fridays too long to point the lamp at the third row from the back. The marquee is lit. The show goes on, and it will. Long after the men who tried to bring the curtain down have left the theatre.